Right now, somewhere in the world, a person is wide awake at 2 in the morning, completely exhausted, desperate to sleep, watching a video about why they can't sleep. That person might be you. And here's the thing that nobody talks about: the way you sleep tonight, the time you go to bed, the fact that you expect 8 straight hours and feel broken when you don't get them. None of that is natural. All of it was invented relatively recently. And before those inventions existed, human beings slept in a way so completely different from what we consider normal today that if you described your current sleep habits to a person from 50,000 years ago, they would genuinely think something was wrong with you. This is the real history of human sleep, and it will explain a lot about why your body fights you at night. To understand how humans slept, you first have to understand what darkness actually meant to our ancestors. Not the darkness of your bedroom with the curtains closed, not city dark, where street lights bleed through every gap and your phone glows every 20 minutes. Real darkness, the kind that existed before electricity, before candles became widespread, before civilization. When the sun disappeared 40,000 years ago, the world became genuinely dangerous in ways that are difficult for modern humans to appreciate. And our bodies, the same bodies you're walking around in right now, were not built for the dark. Here's an uncomfortable biological truth: humans are among the worst equipped large mammals for nighttime survival. Our night vision is poor compared to most predators. We have no meaningful defensive anatomy, no claws, no significant bite force, no speed. We are physically medium-sized, relatively slow, and completely dependent on vision that essentially stops working when the light does. What we had instead was intelligence. And intelligence in the dark expressed itself as extreme anxiety. The moment the sun dropped below the horizon, the human nervous system shifted into a state of heightened alertness that had nothing to do with caffeine or blue light. It was pure evolutionary programming. The brain essentially said, every hour you are unconscious in the dark is an hour something could kill you. The animals that tried to sleep carelessly in the open didn't survive long enough to become your ancestors. The ones who made it through were the ones whose nervous systems treated nighttime as a threat to be managed. This is the inheritance you are carrying right now. When you feel restless at night for no apparent reason, when you startle awake at an unfamiliar sound, when you feel oddly alert at midnight even though you're exhausted, that is not a disorder. That is 40,000 years of nighttime survival instinct running exactly as designed. But your ancestors didn't just lie awake being anxious. They solved the problem. And the solution they found was one of the most consequential technologies in human history. Fire changed everything about what it meant to be human at night. Humans have been controlling fire for somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million years, depending on which archaeological evidence you accept. But the relevant shift for sleep isn't just the warmth or the cooking. It's what fire did to the geometry of danger after dark. A fire at the perimeter of a camp meant that any large predator approaching would be visible. The eyes reflect light, the shadows move, the smell of smoke masks human scent. A fire is not just heat, it is a surveillance system, a perimeter fence, and an alarm all in one. It gave sleeping humans something that had been biologically impossible before: relative safety in the dark. And the brain responded to this in a measurable way that researchers have only recently begun to study. There is strong evidence that watching firelight, specifically the irregular, unpredictable movement of flames, lowers cortisol levels and induces a neurological state that closely resembles deep meditation. When your nervous system detects fire, something ancient in the brain interprets this as a signal. The watch is being kept. You don't have to be the one who stays alert tonight. This is why humans can stare at a candle flame or a campfire for extended periods without boredom. You are not simply entertained, you are being neurologically settled. The fire is doing something to your ancient brain that a white noise machine, a sleeping pill, or a blackout curtain cannot fully replicate. It is telling the oldest part of you that the night has been handled. But fire did something else that almost no one talks about. It created time that had never existed before. Before controlled fire, there was essentially no usable time after dark. The daylight hours were consumed by the relentless demands of survival: hunting, gathering, making tools, moving camp, managing children, watching for threats. There was no spare cognitive bandwidth, no leisure, no space for abstract thought. Fire gave humans their first evening. The hours between sunset and sleep became for the first time a kind of protected social space. People gathered, they talked, they told stories, they debated, laughed, processed conflict, gossiped, planned, and speculated about things that had no immediate survival value whatsoever, which turns out to be exactly the kind of thinking that builds civilization. Several anthropologists now argue that what we call culture, complex language, mythology, ritual, social hierarchy, art, did not emerge primarily from the practical activities of daylight. It emerged from what happened after dark, around the fire, When there was finally nothing else that needed doing, the campfire circle may be the original classroom, the original parliament, and the original theater, all at once. Your instinct to gather in the evening, to talk when the day is done, to want company and story when the practical work is finished. This is not a modern social habit. It is profoundly ancient. The fire is just a different shape now. So when did people actually sleep? And how? Start with where. The idea that sleeping on the ground on whatever surface happened to be available was the standard practice turns out to be wrong. Archaeology has recovered some remarkable evidence about how seriously early humans took their sleeping arrangements. In a cave in South Africa called Sibudu, researchers discovered preserved sleeping mats that are approximately 77,000 years old, making them among the oldest known constructed objects of any kind. What they found wasn't random plant matter. These mats were deliberately engineered with a specific layered structure. The base layer was ash, which serves multiple functions. It insulates against cold from the stone floor, it deters crawling insects, and it has antimicrobial properties that reduce parasite load. Above the ash, layers of woven grass and plant material provided cushioning, and the top layer, the surface people actually slept on, was made using leaves from specific plants that contain natural compounds toxic to mosquitoes and other insects. These were not primitive people grabbing whatever was nearby. These were people applying genuine technical knowledge to the problem of sleep quality. They understood which plants repel insects, they understood thermal insulation, and when a mat became too contaminated with bacteria and parasites, they didn't try to clean it. They burned it and started over. This is 77,000 years ago. The same era that produces the mental image of people huddled in caves grunting at each other. The reality appears to have been rather more thoughtful. Now comes the part that may change how you think about your own sleep entirely. The 8-hour sleep block, the idea that normal healthy sleep means lying down at night and waking up 8 hours later without interruption, is not a biological baseline. It is a relatively recent cultural construction, and the evidence for this is extensive enough that sleep researchers have largely stopped treating it as the default model for human sleep health. Historian Roger E. Kirk spent nearly 2 decades researching historical records of sleep across multiple cultures, and what he found in diaries, court documents, medical texts, and literary references was consistent and striking. Prior to the widespread adoption of artificial lighting, roughly before the mid-19th century, the standard human sleep pattern was not 8 continuous hours. It was 2 separate sleep periods, with a distinct period of wakefulness between them. The first sleep would begin shortly after dark and last approximately 4 hours. Then people would wake, naturally without alarm or disturbance, and remain awake for 1 to 2 hours. During this interval, they would tend to the fire, pray, think, have quiet conversations, or be intimate with their partners. Then they would return to sleep for the second portion of the night, waking near dawn. This 2-phase pattern, called segmented or biphasic sleep, was so standard that historical texts refer to it without any sense that it requires explanation. Writers reference the first sleep and the second sleep as ordinary, unambiguous concepts that their readers would recognize immediately. The waking interval between them wasn't insomnia. It wasn't a malfunction. It was simply part of the night. What changed was industrialization. Factory schedules, shift work, and eventually the electric light made it economically necessary for people to compress their sleep into a single block timed to the demands of the workday. The body adapted, imperfectly. And a new cultural idea emerged, that 8 uninterrupted hours is what sleep is supposed to look like. Anyone who wakes in the middle of the night and can't immediately return to sleep is now likely to interpret this as a problem, to lie there anxious about their insomnia, which makes the wakefulness worse, which confirms the diagnosis. But if E. Kirk's research is correct, many of those people aren't experiencing a disorder. They're experiencing the ghost of a sleep architecture that their biology has preserved for 77,000 years. Their bodies are doing exactly what human bodies were doing before factories told them to stop. Here is where the ancient and the modern meet in the most direct way. Your nervous system does not know what year it is. It cannot tell the difference between the light from a campfire and the light from your phone screen. It processes both using the same ancient photoreceptor system, and it draws conclusions based on rules that have not changed in tens of thousands of years. The specific problem with artificial light is not just brightness, it is the wavelength. The blue spectrum of light that LED screens produce is the same wavelength that your brain's circadian system uses to detect daylight. When you expose your retina to this light, the brain interprets it not as artificial illumination but as dawn. It suppresses melatonin production, it elevates cortisol slightly, it shifts your internal clock forward, and it does this, whether you intend it to or not, Because the system is not operating on conscious instructions, it is operating on ancient biological rules that assume any blue spectrum light means the sun is rising. The ancient brain, confronted with your phone at midnight, concludes that sunrise is happening and it is time to prepare for the day. Your subjective experience of this is that you feel oddly alert long after you expected to be tired. You feel like you can't wind down. You may even feel a vague restlessness, a sense of something unfinished, which is also ancient. That feeling was calibrated for a world where feeling restless at dusk meant going to check on the perimeter, not scrolling through strangers' opinions until 3 a.m. There is also the social dimension of sleep that almost no modern conversation about sleep health addresses. Humans are among the only species that regularly sleep alone. For the vast majority of human existence, sleep was a communal activity. Not because people were short on space, but because sleeping in groups was one of the primary nighttime safety mechanisms. Someone would be awake while others slept. The group's combined noise and warmth deterred predators. Waking in distress meant waking into human company rather than into silence. This is almost certainly part of why many people sleep better next to another person, and why the anxiety of sleeping alone in a strange place feels physiologically different from ordinary tiredness. The body knows the difference between waking into a group and waking into silence. The body registers that difference as information about safety. And then there are dreams, which ancient people had no neurological framework to explain, and which caused them to construct elaborate theories about what the sleeping mind was actually doing. Visitations from the dead, messages from gods, portals to a world that existed alongside this one. The fact that unconsciousness produces vivid, emotionally charged experiences that feel absolutely real and completely impossible simultaneously. This was one of the most philosophically disorienting things about human existence for most of history. It required an explanation, and every culture that has ever existed has produced one. Modern neuroscience has its own explanation: memory consolidation, emotional processing, threat simulation, which is probably correct and significantly less traumatic. But even today, when you wake from a dream that felt more real than the room you're in, you're touching the same mystery your ancestors touched. The experience itself has not changed. Only the story we tell about it has. Here is what all of this adds up to. Your body is not malfunctioning. Your struggles with sleep are not evidence of weakness or disorder. They are in many cases evidence of a mismatch. A body designed by millions of years of evolution for one set of conditions, now asked to perform in conditions that are completely different and were invented in historical terms about 10 minutes ago. You were built to sleep in two phases, with wakefulness between them. You were built to wind down with warmth and firelight, not blue spectrum screens. You were built to sleep near other people, not in silence. You were built to be alert in darkness, not artificially sedated by a schedule that ignores what your biology already knows. None of that means returning to the Stone Age, but it means that when you understand what your body was actually designed for, you stop fighting it as though it's broken and start working with it as though it's ancient. Because it is.